Good morning, everyone. I am Katie Resendez. I'm the Director of Children's Ministries here at UUC Phoenix. Yay, I love my job. I got to spend the night here. Sleeping at church is awesome. It helps that we have a couch that turns into a bed, but don't tell the kids that. I want to invite anyone who'd like a different spot to sit in for a moment to come on up front. And I've got a story for you. I kind of want to start telling you stories from last night, but we like consent, right? So I'm not going to share those. But I will tell you it was amazing that for the first time since November 2019, we had a youth overnight. And at one point last night, there were 30 people here on campus who were youth and adults supporting youth. And never in my 8 years working here, 9 years working here, have I ever seen that kind of support. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Anything but country. See, growing up, when you got in someone's car, they would immediately ask you, what kind of music do you want to listen to? Or they'd say, what station? And where I grew up, the required answer was anything but country. Right? And see, I liked country music, and I went to these people's houses and I saw their tape decks, and their tape decks were full of country. And their radio stations were all tuned to 107.7 WGNA. Okay, something called 107.7 WGNA that you have to say like this is a country station. But we all knew we had to say when we got in that car, anything but country, right? Because we were actually saying something different. We were saying something about where we were from and who we were and how where we grew up affected what we liked and who we would be and how we dressed and how we talked. See, I'm going to say I was lucky because I grew up in Western Massachusetts, but yes, in the mountains and yes, rural. I grew up in a town that less people lived in than live on my block in Phoenix. But we didn't have an accent. We say mountain just like the rest of you say mountain. It's fine. But I actually learned to talk in a different state, in a different city, where when I get really tired, I talk like this. But I learned to cover that up. The exact same way I learned to say anything but country. In 1946, in Pittman Center, Tennessee, on the banks of the Little Pigeon River, Avery Lee and Robert Lee Parton gave birth to their fourth child of what would be 12. Her name was Miss Dolly Rebecca. And by the time she was 6, she was performing at church. She got her first guitar at 7. It was handmade. But everyone saw how much she loved it. And so her uncle got her a real guitar when she was 8. This was a big deal. You see, her family had been sharecroppers. That means that they worked other people's land and farmed other people's land and had to pay those people to farm that land and then also had to give them some of those crops. So they were poor. And in fact, Dolly Parton has said that she was dirt poor. As she grew up, her family eventually did have their own land. They moved to a plot, but they still lived in a one-room cabin for most of her life. And she loved her family very, very much. And she said that even though her father couldn't read, he was illiterate, he was the wisest man she ever met. But that literacy thing became really important to her. And she worked really hard at school. And she loved doing that work, and she loved learning. And she loved her family even when it was hard to love them. And we all go through those times where it's hard to love our family. And she loved herself even when it was hard to love herself. And she actually made it through high school. She kept singing, she kept performing all of those things. Actually, by the time she was 13, She was performing the song Puppy Love on stage at the Grand Ole Opry, which is a really big deal. And if you're not a kid who grew up back east, you're like, what are you talking about? It's awesome, I promise, okay? At the Grand Ole Opry, she met the man in black. She met Johnny Cash. And when she talked to him, everyone else asked her, what grade are you in school? What are you gonna be? Where do you wanna live? Do you like babies? Because that's what we should ask 13-year-olds. But Johnny Cash didn't. He asked her what she liked to do. And she said, this, because she loved to perform. And everyone else was pushing her to go through school, figure out what she could do, who she could be. You're so smart, you could be a doctor. And the man in black, Johnny Cash, told Dolly Parton, live your dream. Do the thing. Don't let other people shutter that for you. I'm sure he said it in a much lower voice, less words, way more gravelly. But I can't do that, sorry. But it's amazing to think that this 13-year-old girl was encouraged by someone who didn't look at her and say, what are you gonna do for work when you get older? Right? That's pretty phenomenal. But it wasn't just him. Lots of people encouraged her, and she encouraged herself, and she wrote tons of music, she performed, and she figured out what her look was and who she was. And when she graduated high school, the very next day, she moved to Nashville, Tennessee. And she became extremely famous. When I was a kid, she was the height of glamour. Blonde hair, big, big, big. I didn't realize it was a wig until I was like 12, but it was amazing. Lots of makeup, blue eyeshadow, red lips, all sorts of things. Also, we talked about her body all the time. And this was a woman whose body was noticeable because she took her chest and put it up here. She took her waist and made it tiny, and she wore big old dresses and sequins and all sorts of stuff. And it wasn't on display for someone else. It wasn't because she was out there trying to court someone. She wasn't trying to romance someone with her tiny little waist. It was her look and how she owned it. Her music was the same too. She did sing about love, but she also sang about home, and she sang about family. She sang about place. She sang about being dirt poor. She is a phenomenal woman. And I think about that line of anything but country. And I think about how I've tried to hide my accent when I was little. Now it comes natural. I think about when people talk about rednecks and hillbillies, what they're actually saying. And I think about when I was a kid, I think I was 7, and someone asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I said, live in a city. I think about what that meant. And also I think about pride and wanting to be proud. So this week, I'm gonna try to be a little bit more Dolly. I'm gonna be more proud and more loud this week about where I came from. I'm gonna let my voice slip into the accent. And when I get in my van on the way home today, I'm just gonna listen to country. Thank you so much.